Of the many types of hunting rifle available today, the bolt action, fitted with a telescopic sight, is by far the most popular. The design is inherently strong, with few moving parts, and is easy to strip and clean. The bolt has an operating arm at the rear and lugs machined into the forward end. These lugs slide on two rails machined into the receiver, and when the bolt is pushed fully forward, the bolt handle can be turned downwards, locking the action, ready for firing. There are two methods used to cock the firing pin housed within the bolt. The first is where the firing pin is drawn back and cocked as the bolt handle is raised from the locked position. The second method cocks the firing pin as the bolt is pushed forward, just before it reaches the locking position. Ammunition is either loaded directly through the floor of the receiver or is loaded into a magazine, which is then clipped into the receiver from below. As the bolt is eased forward, a round is pushed by the bolt face into the chamber of the barrel, and the bolt is turned by its handle to engage the lugs, which lock the bolt securely to the receiver, ready to fire a round. As the round was chambered, a sprung extractor clip eases over the rim on the base of the round, ready to pull the spent case from the chamber when the bolt is pulled back. The spent case is ejected by an arm mounted at the rear of the receiver, which slides in a slot machined into the bolt face. As the bolt is eased forward again, a fresh round is pushed into the chamber and the cycle is complete. These basic operations apply to both rimfire and centerfire rifles, the major difference being the firing pin, which is located centrally on the centerfire and located on the edge of the bolt face on a rimfire. Before we continue, there are a few technical terms associated with ammunition, and the first is FPS. FPS is a shortened version of feet per second, and this is used to describe the velocity of the bullet, in the same way that mph, or miles per hour, is used to describe the speed of a vehicle. And muzzle velocity is the speed of the bullet at or near the rifle's muzzle. The next term is grains. Grains are a unit of weight, as are pounds, ounces, or grams. With all firearms, grains are used to describe the weight of bullets and also the weight of the nitro powder charge used in the manufacture of a complete round. The last term for now is foot-pounds. Foot-pounds describe the energy of the bullet and is derived from a mathematical formula using the speed and weight of the bullet. Generally, a large foot-pound figure has more stopping power than a smaller one. Now, we'll have a brief look at internal ballistics, and we'll start with rimfires. Modern rimfire rifles use the long rifle round. Rimfire long rifle sonic and subsonic rounds are the same size, but the Magnum round, which is larger, needs a rifle chambered to accept it. The bullet, or head, is generally made of soft lead with a wax or gilded coating. Rimfire ammunition is manufactured using a metal case which is formed with a hollow rim around its base. A small amount of liquid explosive is poured into the case, which fills the void around the rim and is then dried. This is the primer charge. Next, a measured amount of propellant powder is added, and finally the lead bullet is pressed into the case. The round is fired by the firing pin striking the rim of the case, which compresses the primer, causing it to detonate. The hot gases from the primer then ignite the propellant, and the resulting expanding gas forces the bullet from the case and up the barrel. Rimfire ammunition cannot be reloaded. Now, we'll look at centerfire ammunition. Centerfire rifles are available in many different calibers, and the ammunition has many variations in weight and type. The case for the centerfire rifle ammunition is normally made from brass, with a primer pocket in its base and a small flash hole leading from the primer pocket into the main part of the case. The primer is formed from a metal cup and contains a solid disc of explosive with a tiny metal anvil inserted upside down in contact with this explosive. The primer is pressed into the pocket in the bottom of the case. A measured amount of propellant powder is now added. And finally, a bullet is pressed into the case mouth. When the firing pin strikes the primer, it distorts the metal cup and compresses the explosive against the anvil, causing the explosive to detonate. The resulting flash travels through the flash hole and ignites the propellant. The expanding gas from the propellant first forces the brass case to enlarge, which seals the small space between the chamber and the case. Then, the still expanding gas forces the bullet from the case and up the barrel. The initial expansion of the case to seal it in the chamber is very important. Pressure in the case can reach 50,000 pounds per square inch, and as well as sealing the case to the chamber, the friction between them holds the case in position, which ensures that the bolt is not unduly stressed by the case moving rearwards. Extreme pressure on the bolt face will eventually cause excess head space. This is the distance between the bolt face and the rear of the case when the bolt is closed. Excess headspace will lead to case fractures near the rim, which in severe cases will blow the rifle and you apart. Check your spent cases, and if you find any splits or cracks, take the rifle to a gunsmith. Don't use it. Always make sure that your ammunition is clean and free of oil or water, and when you clean your rifle, ensure that the chamber is also clean and dry. As you have already seen, centerfire ammunition can be reloaded. Before we move on, always buy good quality ammunition in a reasonable quantity from the same manufacturer's batch. As mentioned earlier, rimfire bullets are generally made of soft lead with a wax or gilded finish. But because of the much higher bullet velocities and weights used with centerfire ammunition, the construction is a lot more complex. Centerfire bullets are generally constructed with a copper or copper alloy case which is filled with lead or an alloy of lead. The most widely used types for hunting are the soft point and the hollow point. Both soft and hollow point bullets expand and mushroom easily when contacting flesh and bone. This expansion slows the bullet down and therefore expends most of its energy within the quarry. Full metal jacket and target or match type bullets are designed for range shooting and not hunting. They tend to travel straight through flesh without expanding, and they should not be used on live quarry. Now we'll look at external ballistics. The following diagrams and tables are only examples and are exaggerated for the sake of clarity. Refer to your ammunition manufacturer's ballistic tables for your own caliber, or if you reload, then use the bullet maker's tables. Regular shooting practice over known distances will give you confidence in gauging bullet drop and wind effects at various ranges. And first, we'll look at bullet drop. Imagine a rifle fixed to a stable platform and adjusted so that the line of the bore is parallel to the ground. If a telescopic sight is now fixed to the rifle, the sight line of the scope will be parallel to the bore line and around 1.5 inches above it. If a bullet is now fired, the force of gravity pulls it downwards until it finally hits the ground some distance from the rifle. The further the bullet travels away from the rifle, the greater the distance between the sight line and the bullet. If we now adjust the telescopic sight so that the sight line crosses the bullet path at, say, 200 yards, the rifle is now said to be zeroed at 200 yards. The bullet crosses the sight line a few yards from the barrel and then travels above the sight line before the zero and below the sight line after the zero. At 50 yards, the bullet is 0.6 of an inch high. At 100 yards, it is 2 inches high. And at 150 yards, it is 1.8 inches high. At 250 yards, the bullet is 4 inches below the sight line, and at the 300-yard mark, it is 12.5 inches below. This is what a target would look like if it were moved to each range with the 300-yard mark 12.5 inches below the bull, so it's right off the target. We'll be coming back to bullet drop shortly, but now we'll look at the effect of wind on the bullet. The rifle is still fixed in position, but this time it's at the bottom of the diagram, and we're looking down from above, with the bore line going straight up the center. The sight line is now superimposed onto the bore line, and when the rifle is fired with no wind, the bullet path follows the vertical axis of the sight line. With a 20-mile-an-hour headwind, the bullet still follows the sight line, but as the wind changes direction, so the bullet is blown further away from the vertical axis, as its distance from the rifle increases. Maximum deviation occurs with the wind at right angles to the sight line, and in this example, with a 20-mile-an-hour wind, it is 2.5 inches off the sight line at 250 yards. Now, we'll use the bullet drop and windage calculations to work out a point-blank range. Point-blank range is a method of determining an area where the bullet will strike out to a maximum range with a maximum wind. As an example, we'll work out a point-blank range for a 4-inch kill zone, which could be used for chest shots on foxes, also heart and lung shots on small deer. If we go back to the bullet drop diagram, the maximum rise of the bullet above the sight line is 2 inches at 100 yards. By using the ammunition maker's ballistic charts, or by trial and error on a range, we look for a corresponding drop of 2 inches below the sight line, which in this example occurs at 235 yards. A target would look like this, and the 2-inch rise or fall gives us a vertical line of 4 inches where the bullet will strike at any range out to 235 yards with no wind. If we now go back to the windage diagram and put the 235-yard mark from the bullet drop calculations on it, we have a maximum deviation with a 20-mile-an-hour wind of 1.9 inches. If the maximum deviation at different ranges is added to the bullet drop target, it will look like this, at the fixed ranges of 50, 100, 150, 200 and 235 yards. So, for any wind up to 20 miles an hour and at any range from say 40 yards out to 235 yards, the bullet will strike within this triangle. If you imagine the 4-inch triangle superimposed on an animal, the relative size of the triangle is proportional to the quarry size. No matter what the range, the triangle's size remains relative to the size of the animal. Using this method, we only have to estimate one maximum distance, also one maximum wind speed. In this example, the maximum distance is 235 yards, and the maximum wind speed is 20 miles an hour. The next area to look at is elevation, or firing up and downhill. With the rifle on the left of your picture, and using the previous example of a 200-yard zero, the bullet path looks like this. If the rifle is now pointed upwards at an angle of 45 degrees, the bullet will strike higher than it did when the rifle was level. If the rifle is now fired vertically, the bullet will cross the sight line a few yards from the barrel, but it will never recross the sight line, and in fact will land some distance behind the rifle. You can see that the greater the angle, the higher the bullet will strike over a fixed range. When firing downhill, this is the same 45-degree angle as before, the bullet again strikes high. And if it were possible to shoot straight down a cliff face, again, once the bullet crosses the sight line a few yards from the barrel, it will never recross the sight line. A simple explanation is that gravity pulls straight down from the horizontal. Therefore, if the rifle is zeroed at 200 yards on level ground, gravity exerts a more or less 90-degree downward pull on the bullet over the entire distance. But when the rifle is fired up or downhill, the pull of gravity at 90 degrees to the horizontal over this shorter distance has less effect, and the bullet will strike higher than it did when shooting on level ground. This chart is an example of bullet rise at different angles. Notice that the rise is the same if the angle is positive or uphill, or negative downhill. With light bullets and or higher muzzle velocities, the bullet rise will be much less. At normal hunting ranges, say up to 200 yards, and with a reasonable elevation of less than 30 degrees up or down, there's really no need to compensate for bullet rise if using the point-blank range technique. But if you do compensate, then always aim low. The last item here is recoil. The laws of physics states that for every force there is an equal and opposite force. When a rifle is fired, the expanding gas forces the bullet up the barrel, but it also pushes the rifle in the opposite direction. Here, we'll use a bullet weighing 200 grains with a muzzle velocity of 3,000 feet per second. If it were possible to manufacture a rifle where the case, the primer, and the rifle weighed the same as the bullet, when fired, the bullet and the rifle would part company in opposite directions at the same speed, both with an energy of 1,000 foot-pounds. Luckily, rifles are much heavier than this and can absorb most of this rearward energy, or recoil. As a very simple example, if we have a 200-grain bullet and compare it to various rifle weights, the bullet-to-rifle ratio increases as the weight of the rifle gets heavier. In other words, you will feel more recoil from a lightweight from a heavier weight rifle. Good stock and butt plate design, as well as how the rifle is held, all influence felt recoil. Ideally, the weight of the upper torso should be added to the weight of the rifle, and recoil is absorbed as you roll with its punch. Now, we'll spend a few minutes looking at shooting technique. Your rifle must be comfortable to use, and generally, the distance from the trigger to the butt should be shorter than with a shotgun. Small variations in length can be achieved by replacing a butt plate with a thicker recoil pad or vice versa. But for small or slightly built people, the butt may need to be shortened. During the winter months, you may have many layers of clothing compared to the summer, which will alter the length of pull, so bear this in mind if you have your rifle altered. If you have to use high mounts for your scope because of a large objective lens, then you may need to add padding to the cheek piece to get a comfortable fit. Eye relief is a term used to describe the distance from the rear lens of a telescopic sight to the shooter's eye when a full, clear sight picture can be seen. Cheaper scopes meant for air guns or rimfires tend to have a short eye relief. If this scope were used on a heavy recoiling rifle, the metal rim could cause serious damage to your eyebrow when the weapon is fired. If you close your eyes, then mount the rifle and rest your cheek on the stock in a comfortable position as though aiming the rifle, when you open your eyes, you should get a good sight picture. If you have to move your head backwards or forwards to get a correct picture, then the sight needs moving in the opposite direction. The objective is to get a good sight picture as soon as the gun is mounted. A lot of people hold the stock on the forend much too tightly. This can cause the sight picture to move in time with your heartbeat, and even cause your muscles to tremor, which will affect the sight picture and, of course, accuracy. The rifle butt should be placed comfortably in your shoulder pocket, and with a firm but not tight hold on the pistol grip. Gently pull backwards to seat the butt into your shoulder pocket. If shooting from the prone position or from a bench with the forend supported, clench your free hand and place it under the butt. By squeezing or relaxing this hand, you can raise or lower the point of aim. When firing from a post or tree, use your free hand to support the forend. If you are standing, then again, your free hand supports the forend with most of your weight on your leading foot. Don't grip the forend tightly, just support it. One of the most comfortable positions is sitting down. Spread your feet about 2 to 3 feet apart and place your elbows inside your knees. Gently squeeze your knees together. At the same time, push your elbows outwards, and with practice, you should be quite stable. Another alternative, if you use a sling, is to pass your left elbow through it and tension the sling and your left forearm while supporting the forend. If you adjust the sling to suit this method, then normally you can still carry the rifle over your shoulder. Now the gun is comfortable and held securely, you must relax so that you can absorb any recoil and not flinch when the rifle fires. Wear earmuffs or plugs when practicing, as apart from ear protection, this will help you if you tend to flinch when firing. Now take a few normal breaths in and out, but not too deeply, The idea is to become aware of your breathing and try to relax. If the sight picture is steady and the crosshairs where you want them, then just as you breathe out, stop breathing. Gently squeeze the trigger and go with the recoil. Don't fight it. When mounting the rifle and holding the pistol grip, your first finger should fall naturally onto the trigger. If you hold the grip too tightly, when you pull the trigger, your hand will move, which will alter the point of aim, and you'll miss your target. Practice holding the grip and moving the trigger without moving the rifle. Trigger movement should be slow and controlled, from the first movement through the let-off point or firing point up to the trigger stop or maximum travel. By the way, if you practice pulling the trigger, then make sure the rifle is uncocked or the bolt removed, because dry firing will enlarge the firing pin hole in the bolt face and may also break the firing pin. If you pull the trigger as just mentioned, then you are already starting to follow through the shot. The recoil will have moved your point of aim, but don't try to pull the rifle back to that point straight away. The follow-through time need only be 1 second or so, but it is well worth practicing, especially when shooting over longer distances. Whether or not you follow these techniques we have just shown, be consistent. If you hold the rifle and follow through exactly the same way for every shot you take, then you will be able to place shots more confidently. And, with practice, you'll be able to tell whether or not it was your own fault that you missed, or as the Americans say, calling the shot. Now, we'll move on to telescopic sights. A telescopic sight, as the name suggests, is similar to a telescope, except for an aiming mark or reticule superimposed on the same plane as the object being observed. This feature enables your eye to focus on the target and the reticule at the same time, unlike traditional open sights, where the rear sight has to be aligned with the foresight, and this combination is then aimed at your target. Unlike a telescope, the rear lens is much larger, which allows your eye to be placed a short distance away from the scope to allow for the effect of recoil. Two adjusters on the scope body allow the reticule to be minutely adjusted in both the horizontal and vertical planes. This enables the scope to be aligned with the rifle point of impact at a given range, commonly known as zeroing. There are two types of reticule adjustment. The first, and less common, is where the reticule is moved within the field of view. As an example, the rifle is aimed at the bull and 3 shots are fired, resulting in a group average of 2 inches right and 2 inches down. The windage and elevation are adjusted to bring the point of aim 2 inches right and 2 inches down. The sight picture will now look like this. Although clear, the sight picture is not central, and in extreme cases, this can be rectified by packing or shimming the sight mounts and the rifle re-zeroed to bring the reticule further towards the center of your field of view. With most modern scopes, when the reticule is adjusted, it remains central within the sight picture, but the rifle's point of impact changes. As with the previous example, the group is 2 inches right and 2 inches down. If the reticule is now adjusted, the point of impact changes, but the sight picture remains the same. When this type of scope is near the limits of adjustment, although the reticule will remain central, the sight picture can blur very easily if your eye position alters slightly. Therefore, proper scope mounting is essential with both types of reticule, and we'll be dealing with this shortly. The many magnifications available can be confusing, especially to a first-time buyer who tends to buy a more powerful scope than he needs. With a 4-power, the field of view is 6 degrees, which translates to 30 feet at 100 yards and 60 feet at 200 yards. An 8-power scope has a field of view of 3 degrees, or 15 feet at 100 yards and 30 feet at 200 yards. And finally, a 12-power has a field of view of 2 degrees, or 10 feet at 100 yards and 20 feet at 200 yards. Wide-angle scopes are also available, but these only add a few feet to the normal field of view. Variable power or zoom scopes, such as 3 to 9 or 4 to 12 power, are excellent if used sensibly. The drawback being that range estimation is impossible if you continually zoom in and out. The last point when choosing a sight is the objective lens size. This is the large lens at the front of the sight. Here we have a 9-power scope. The objective lens is 30 millimeters across, so the scope is known as a 9 by 30. Light enters the objective lens and exits through the eyepiece. If we divide the objective lens size by the scope's magnification power, we get an approximate diameter of the exit pupil size, or the bundle of light rays coming out of the eyepiece. In this instance, it's just over 3 millimeters. The diameter of your eye's pupil in bright light is around 3 millimeters. Therefore, this scope will give a bright image in bright light. But in low light conditions, your eye's pupil will measure around 5 millimeters, so the fixed 3 millimeters from the scope doesn't fill the pupil. Therefore, the scope's image will be indistinct and very dim. If we now look at a 9-power scope with a 45 millimeter objective lens, then by dividing the objective size by the magnification, we now have an exit pupil size of 5 millimeters. This gives a good image in bright light, as there is more light than your eye's pupil can use, and in low light we still get a good sight picture, because the scope's exit pupil diameter fills your eye's pupil. This is a variable power scope of 3 to 9 times magnification, with an objective lens size of 40 millimeters. The magnification is varied by rotating a ring placed in front of the eyepiece. As you can see, the exit pupil diameter alters as the magnification of the scope is changed. Most modern rifles are equipped with grooves machined into the top of the receiver, which will accept one-piece mounts. Some rifles, especially the old Mauser actions, need drilling and threading to accept blocks, to which scope rings are then fitted. Get the correct mounts and make sure that the objective lens is not touching the barrel and that the eyepiece doesn't foul the bolt handle. Before you try and zero a new rifle or scope, I would suggest that you disassemble the mounts and reassemble them using a thread locking compound, so that the fixing screws won't come loose after prolonged use. Using a screwdriver or Allen key, take off the ring tops. Remove the scope and place it somewhere safe. Next, remove the ring bases. Now clean the dovetails and the grooves in the receiver. Now, reassemble the mounts using a thread locking compound. Attach the scope, but don't tighten it fully just yet. Make sure that the elevation adjustment is on top with the windage to your right. Shoulder the rifle and slide the scope backwards or forwards until you get a good sight picture and eye relief. If you have to move your head backwards to get a good image, then the scope needs to move forwards and vice versa. Once you have found the best position, and especially if you have a heavy recoiling rifle, such as a 270 or a 308, then move the scope forward slightly. This is just extra insurance against the scope contacting your eyebrow when firing from an awkward position. Now aim at something you know is perfectly vertical and about 50 yards away. If in doubt, hang a weight by a piece of cord from a tree. Align the scope's vertical crosshair with the cord by twisting the scope to the left or right. When you're happy with the vertical alignment, you can tighten the top ring mounts. Check the eye relief and vertical alignment again, and if necessary, slacken the ring tops and readjust the scope. Now, we'll centralize the scope. Take off the elevation and windage caps, and, using a screwdriver, gently screw in the elevation adjustment until it reaches its stop, or you can feel resistance. Now, unscrew the adjuster and count the number of turns until it reaches the opposite end of its travel. Let's assume that the adjuster turns 3.5 revolutions. If we now screw the adjuster in by half this amount, 1 3/4 turns, the elevation adjustment should be more or less central. Now carry out the same procedure with the windage adjustment. The next thing to do before zeroing the rifle is to focus the eyepiece. Look through the scope while pointing it at the sky or a white wall, and the reticule should appear very sharp and solid black. If the reticule is not sharp, then hold the eyepiece locking ring with one hand, and with the other hand unlock the eyepiece. As a general rule, if you are long-sighted, then the eyepiece needs to be unscrewed and screwed in to compensate for short-sightedness. When the reticule is sharp, move the locking ring towards the eyepiece, and holding the ring in one hand and the eyepiece in the other, tighten the eyepiece, not the ring, to lock up the assembly. The scope is now ready and we can zero the rifle. Get a large cardboard box and mark a cross on it. Place the box 25 paces from your shooting position with a safe earth backstop behind it. When you zero your rifle, it's always best to get the most stable shooting position you can. Now relax, take your time and fire 2 or 3 rounds at the cross. Now, adjust the windage to bring the group onto the vertical of the cross. Most scopes have minimum marks relating to 1/4 inch at 100 yards, so the smallest marks are 1/4 inch, and the numbers relate to whole inches at 100 yards. As our target is at 25 yards, the whole numbers will move the point of impact around 1/4 inch left or right. So if, as in this case, the point of impact is about 3/4 inch right, we need to adjust the windage 3 whole divisions left, which will move our point of impact left by 3/4 inch. Another marking system is MOA, which represents minutes of angle. 1 minute of angle is approximately 1 inch at 100 yards, and if your scope has 4 divisions between the marks, then it's the same as the previous example, so we move the adjuster 3 whole divisions left. Now fire another group, and if everything is okay, the group should be more or less on the vertical of the cross, If it's still off slightly, then don't waste any more ammunition, as this exercise is to roughly zero the rifle before moving on to zeroing at a hunting range. The final groups were around 1.5 inches low of the horizontal line, which is about right at this stage, but now we need to set the horizontal zero a bit more precisely. Using the elevation adjuster, we need a group that is near the cross for small caliber, low velocity centerfires and rimfires, or 1/2 of an inch below the cross for high velocity centerfire rifles. Using the same technique as before, adjust the elevation to bring your group up, and then we can zero the rifle at our intended hunting range. If at this stage your groups were wildly off, let's say 4 or 5 inches up or down, then the chances are that the sight mounts are wrong. This normally happens with Mauser type actions, where one of the mounting blocks is the wrong size, and this will have to be changed. Otherwise the scope adjustments will be at their extremes, or you may not be able to zero at 100 yards at all. Now we'll zero at a normal hunting range. As a rough guide, a normal zeroing range for rimfires is 50 to 70 yards. Magnum rimfires and Hornet centerfires can be zeroed at 100 yards, and high velocity centerfires need to strike around 1 inch high at 100 yards, but this is personal choice. To zero a rifle at say 100 yards, I prefer a proper target, which will allow you to see more precisely where the bullet groups are striking. It's worthwhile spending half an hour with a ruler, pen and compass making a proper target, which can then be photocopied. The target can be stapled or taped to a wooden board or cardboard box. Using the same technique as before, zero the rifle at your preferred range. Start with the vertical group and fire 3 shots. Adjust the windage on the scope and repeat until you're satisfied. Now adjust the horizontal group. Don't try and do both together. Take your time and aim carefully. If you find that the shots are stringing up or sometimes down, then you probably have a rifle where the barrel touches the fore end of the stock and is not floating. This fore end pressure is normal on some hunting rifles, and to check, just slide a piece of paper between the fore end and the barrel. If the paper stops near the fore end, then the rifle has been manufactured with fore end pressure. If the paper slides all the way down to the front of the action, then the barrel is fully floating. With fore end pressure, the point of impact will move up or occasionally down as the barrel heats up. When hunting, you only fire 1 shot, sometimes 2 if the animal is not dispatched with the first, and you must duplicate this when zeroing the rifle. Fire 1 or at the most 2 rounds and then let the barrel cool for say 10 minutes before shooting again. If you have this vertical stringing and your barrel is floating, then check the action screws, as one or both may be loose. The foremost screw should be quite tight and the back screw not quite as tight. If you have groups that resemble a shotgun pattern all over the target, then try to get an experienced shooter to try your rifle. If the pattern is similar, then you need the help of a good gunsmith. Let's assume that the rifle is now zeroed, so we can go on to look at range estimation with a telescopic sight. Most modern scopes are fitted with a duplex type reticule, where 4 thick posts diverge to thin crosshairs in the centre of the field of view. We can use an animal's chest size, which is the measurement from the top of its shoulder to the deepest part of its underside, to estimate its range. If the chest of a deer touches the upper and lower stadia at 50 yards, then it will fill 3/4 of this distance at 75 yards, and half the distance at 100 yards. We could also use the animal's height from the ground to its shoulder once we know the approximate size of our quarry. This table shows average ground to shoulder height for various mature animals, but remember that local variations do exist, so take these into account. With the luxury of a variable power scope, you can set a target of a known size at a fixed range, say 100 yards, and zoom in to get the same result. Once you have set a magnification that you're happy with, then use black electrical tape to bind up the power ring so that it won't get altered by accident, and to stop the temptation of zooming in on your quarry. By always using a fixed power or a variable power scope set at a fixed magnification, you will get a consistent sight picture which will enable you to judge ranges more accurately. The last topic on telescopic sights is parallax. Low power scopes, say 2 to 4 times, are normally factory set to focus at between 50 and 150 yards. The smaller the magnification, the greater the depth of field or distance that will always be in focus. With higher power scopes, such as 10 or 12 magnification, then focusing becomes more critical. This 12 power scope is set for 200 yards, but if we now look at a target 45 yards away, it's out of focus. With a target at 80 yards, the sight picture looks reasonable, but if you move your head slightly, the reticule will appear to move around the target, although the rifle is quite steady. This is known as parallax, and to overcome this problem, the scope manufacturers fit a variable focus ring to the objective lens, which is normally marked in yards or meters. By setting this ring to the approximate range that you'll be shooting over, parallax will be more or less eliminated. If we go back to the target at 45 yards and adjust the objective ring, the target becomes focused. Before we finish, buy a good make of scope. Cheap ones rarely last long, and the sight picture is normally blurred or indistinct, or the reticule comes loose because of the rifle's recoil. Every time the rifle is fired, primer and powder deposits, as well as copper and lead, foul the rifling in the barrel. This fouling builds up until a small shot-to-shot variation in your group will start to appear, becoming worse as more and more shots are fired. This 1.7 has to be cleaned every 18 to 20 rounds, otherwise the accuracy goes right off. Long periods between use can also cause rust to start in the barrel if it's not cleaned and protected. With centerfire rifles other than a 1.7, a good guide is to clean the barrel every 40 to 50 rounds if it's in regular use. Before you start cleaning, make sure that you've got a proper solvent. You need a solvent specially made for cleaning rifle barrels. Shotgun solvents don't normally remove copper deposits. You need the correct size bronze brush, eyes or jags, and rods or flexible coated wire for your caliber, as well as patches, either the paper type on a roll or the flannel type on a roll or in squares. You should always work from the receiver end of the barrel, but if not, then you must take care not to let the cleaning rod rub the muzzle crown, as this will eventually cause erratic groups, and the barrel will need to be cut down by an inch or so and recrowned. Now, with a patch soaked in solvent, pull or push it through the barrel, taking care to keep the rod from touching the muzzle as far as possible. Now pass a clean patch through. With the bronze brush, also wetted in solvent, pull or push this through, again being careful of the muzzle. A couple of clean patches to remove most of the gunge, and another clean patch soaked in solvent. At this stage, some people prefer to put a small cork in the muzzle and clamp the rifle on end with the solvent filling the barrel. The choice is yours, but either way, leave the rifle to soak for at least an hour or more. If you have filled the barrel with solvent, then take out the cork over a container to catch the liquid and use 2 or 3 patches to dry it. Another patch soaked in solvent and another 2 to dry the barrel. If at this stage the patches are still a bit soiled, then repeat the procedure. If you're not going to use the rifle for a while, then lightly wet a patch with good quality gun oil and pull it through. Alternatively, the remnants of the solvent will protect the barrel against rust for quite a few days. If you're going to shoot the rifle straight away, then wet a patch with methylated spirits and pull it through. 2 more clean patches will remove anything left and the barrel is ready to fire. If you have stored the rifle with an oiled barrel, then use 2 patches to remove most of the oil, followed by 1 patch soaked in meths and 2 dry patches to finish. If you don't finish off with methylated spirit, you'll find that the first few shots will be wide of the mark, due to the residue from the cleaning solvent or oil in the barrel. Lightly oil or spray the exterior metal and wipe clean. If you have a good walnut stock, then occasionally rub walnut oil into it with the palm of your hand and leave to dry overnight in a warm room. Polish off with a soft cloth. Varnished or synthetic stocks can be cleaned using a household furniture spray and polished off. At least once a year, or if the rifle is used in very wet weather, take out the action screws and remove the barrel and action from the stock. Brush off any grit or mud from the metalwork, and if there is any rust, then fine wire wool soaked in oil should remove it. If the bluing is affected, get a retouching kit from your gun shop and follow the instructions. Finally, rub oil into all of the metalwork. Brush out the bedding and barrel groove in the stock and reassemble the rifle, taking care to tighten the action screws. That about brings us to the end of this video, but here are a few tips that might help you. No matter how good a shot you think you are, always spend time on a range, shooting over known distances and in different weather conditions. Shoot in windy and wet weather to see the effect it has on your bullet placement. Practice kneeling, standing and sitting shots, as you won't always be able to get comfortable in a prone position. And if in doubt, don't shoot. Get some covers for your scope. These are sometimes supplied with it and are available in various forms, but the ones I prefer are the flip-up type made in America. They fit snugly over the objective lens, and to see through the scope, you just push the small ear forward and the cover springs out of the way. To replace it, just snap it back again. This type of cover is also available for the eyepiece, but if you have a heavy recoiling rifle, then be aware of the operating lever, as this can sometimes catch your eye. Always make sure that the rifle barrel is clear of mud or snow. A good idea is to put electrical tape over the end of your barrel and shoot through it. This will stop anything entering the barrel, and the tape can be replaced after each shot. If you drop or knock the scope, then always assume that the rifle is not zeroed, and don't use it until you can check the zero at a paper target. Although a rifle slip will protect your outfit from the elements, especially when hill stalking, the scope can be knocked when travelling in the boot of your car, and it's well worth purchasing a rifle case. These need not be elaborate affairs. This Polytype case costs about £30 and will give excellent service for many years. As I mentioned earlier, always buy good quality ammunition and make sure that it's all from the same batch. Different batches of the same caliber and make can sometimes shoot to a different point of impact, so make sure that the ammunition that you use in the field is the same batch as the one that you last zeroed your rifle with. Quick release sling mounts can be very handy, especially if you have more than one rifle, as you can use the same sling on both. You can detach your sling and use it in an emergency to drag a carcass if you've forgotten your drag rope, or to fit a bipod. Some people don't like bipods. I personally do, and I find them invaluable for long-range fox shooting. They are available in different sizes, and with a quick release on your sling, they can be fitted in a few seconds with just a coin. The legs are adjustable for height, and they give the rifle stability whether you're lying prone or shooting from the bonnet of a car. Finally, always make sure that you have a safe backdrop to shoot against. Accidents with rifles are very rare, so please use your head, and if in doubt, don't shoot. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's helped you get more enjoyment from our sport. Our next effort will be available soon, and this will concentrate on more advanced topics such as reloading and rifle tuning. But for now, goodbye and good shooting. In our previous video, we covered most of the basic principles involved with ballistics, scope mounting, zeroing, and shooting technique. Now we're going to look at the main reasons why a rifle can shoot badly or erratically, and we'll suggest remedies to cure each of the problems as they arise. The definition of accuracy will vary from one individual to another. One person may be satisfied with a 4-inch group at 100 yards, which is fine for heart and lung shots on larger quarries such as deer at this range. But this group will be 8 inches at 200 and 12 inches at 300 yards. At 50 yards, the same group will be 2 inches, which is marginal for a broadside, high neck shot on small deer, but fine for shooting foxes at this range. Someone else may only accept a 1-inch group at 100 yards. This will spread to 2 inches at 200 and 3 inches at 300 yards. This is the sort of accuracy that's needed for long-range fox control with lighter calibers, or for short-range neck-shooting deer with the heavier calibers. You need to consistently place your shots in an area that represents a kill zone for the size and at the expected maximum range of your intended quarry. Once you know your grouping ability, you won't miss, unless you've made a mistake or something has changed with your firearm. To make this video easier to follow, we've divided it into 3 sections: the rifle itself, the telescopic sight, and finally ammunition, and we'll start with the rifle. Most modern rifles are fairly accurate straight from the box. Cheaper, mass-produced firearms are manufactured by machines to within certain tolerances with a minimum of hand finishing. These are fine for general use and can be improved by carefully selecting ammunition that suits the rifle and by minor gunsmithing tasks such as action bedding and improving the trigger pull. Generally speaking, by spending more on a new rifle, you can expect a better grade of barrel, hand finishing of the receiver, and a good action bedding job and a nice stock. If finances are a bit tight, then buy second hand. But bear in mind that somebody sold that rifle for a reason. Maybe the previous owner gave up because he thought that he couldn't shoot straight. Perhaps it was the rifle's fault. If you can be sure of the rifle's history, or your dealer is prepared to guarantee it, then you should be okay. There is a date code that was stamped on the barrel when the rifle was proofed. This will give you a good idea of its age. Generally speaking, the older the rifle, the more rounds it has fired. Therefore, it should be more worn than a younger one. Now we'll look at how we can improve accuracy and the reasons why a rifle won't group reliably. We'll assume that your shooting technique is consistent and that your rifle is in good condition, because if the bore is shot out, then nothing apart from a new barrel or a new rifle will improve it. Most barrels, if looked after, will fire many thousands of rounds before they need replacing. But if you're in any doubt, then take your rifle to a gun shop and have it checked. There are no hard and fast rules regarding cleaning. Every round you fire will leave powder and lead or copper fouling in the bore. This fouling builds up until it starts to affect accuracy. The 1.7 needs to be cleaned about every 15 to 20 rounds, whereas most other centre fires will need cleaning about every 50 rounds. 2.2 rim fires with wax-coated lead bullets should be cleaned every 100 rounds, although some semi-autos may need cleaning more often. With a brand new rifle out of the box, give the bore a good scrub with a bronze brush of the right size, soaked in a good cleaning solution. Don't forget to clean the chamber as well, and before you use the rifle, get rid of any residue cleaner or oil by pulling through a patch soaked in methylated spirits, followed by a couple of dry patches. On some new rifles, especially cheaper ones, the bore can be a bit rough because of the manufacturing process, and it may need a few boxes of ammunition through it before the groups start to shrink. The barrel end, or crown, plays a very important role as far as accuracy is concerned. If the crown is damaged, then as a bullet leaves the bore, its spin from the rifling will be upset, and it will revolve off-centre or even topple as it speeds towards the point of impact. If you clean the bore from the barrel end, then try to keep the cleaning rod from touching the rifling. If the barrel crown is worn through continuous rough cleaning, it will affect accuracy, and the only solution is to have the barrel shortened, then recrowned. If the crown is dented or damaged, then again it will need recrowning. The action screws which clamp the receiver and barrel assembly to the stock can cause a lot of accuracy problems. This is more pronounced with a wooden stocked rifle that has been manufactured with 4M pressure. 4M pressure is used to cut down barrel vibration on light-barreled hunting rifles, which makes them more accurate when using run-of-the-mill ammunition. To check if your rifle has this 4M pressure, slide a piece of paper under the barrel and into the forend. If the paper stops, then you have 4M pressure, or rubbish, under the barrel. If the paper goes down to the receiver, then the barrel is floating. If one or both of the action screws are loose, you will get inconsistent groups as the action moves and the fore-end pressure alters between each shot. On the other hand, if the screws are much too tight, the point of aim will alter as the wooden stock swells and shrinks because of humidity and temperature. With a floating barrel in a wooden stock, these effects aren't so pronounced, and they're even less noticeable with a synthetic stock. The action screws must be reasonably tight, not forced, with the front screws slightly tighter than the rear. Take out the action and barrel and look at the bedding. The recoil lug has to sit squarely against this front face. The mark left by the lug should be even across this face and across the top. There should be a mark under the tang, but there should be minimal signs of wood to metal contact in the area around the back and sides of the tang. If the marks around the tang are the same or heavier as those from the recoil lug, then a lot of the recoil is being absorbed by the tang, not the lug. This will severely affect accuracy and may even split the stock. The area around the back of the tang should be relieved and the recoil lug rebedded, preferably with epoxy or glass resin. Ideally, with a floating barrel, there are 3 bearing points for receiver to stock fit. The front and the top of the recoil block, and the area under the tang, not the sides or the rear of it. With light, free-floating barrels, the bedding is sometimes extended an inch or 2 under the barrel. Look for marks made by the sides of the receiver. See if the trigger unit is fouling its inletting. The magazine guide may be exerting force in its well. The bolt handle may be touching the stock when closed. The area around the bolt catch on the side of the receiver may need relieving, and the action screws might be binding between the trigger plate and the receiver. In theory, none of these areas should touch the stock, and they can affect accuracy to a small or large extent depending on the individual rifle. All wooden stocks expand and contract relative to the amount of water they have absorbed from humidity in the air. A wooden stock can sometimes warp, which will cause all sorts of problems. If the action needs twisting to replace it in the stock, or if the gap between the barrel and the stock becomes uneven towards the fore-end, then the stock may be warped. If you're not sure, then get advice from a gun shop. The best solution to a warped stock is to fit one of the many fine synthetic or laminated stocks. Alternatively, have the rifle restocked with a good piece of walnut, but this can be very expensive. Accuracy can be affected by a trigger which is very stiff. Most modern rifles have adjustable triggers with screws to alter the length of pull, trigger spring pressure, let-off point or engagement, or any combination of these 3. Before adjusting a trigger, take the trigger assembly off and clean it thoroughly, because it may just be caked in dirt. Oil it very sparingly and refit it. If cleaning makes no difference, then try adjusting it to give a more acceptable let-off. Don't overdo it and make it too light, as this can be very dangerous, with the rifle firing on its own or firing as the bolt is closed. A trigger pull of 2 or 3 pounds is about the minimum to aim for. When dry firing your rifle, use a snap cap or a spent round, or you may break the firing pin. If you've adjusted it and it's still a bit stiff, then try putting your thumb on top of the grip just behind the receiver and squeezing the trigger between your thumb and first finger. Alternatively, ask your gun dealer if it's possible to fit a better unit. If the trigger feels gritty as it's pulled, then the sear probably needs honing. The angle between the trigger and sear is critical, so honing it is probably best left to a gunsmith. If you're in the habit of shooting by supporting the barrel on, say, a fence post, then the rifle will fire to a different point than when it was supported by the forend. This is due to some extent by the barrel bending because it's supporting the weight of the rifle. If you consider that 1/1000th of an inch bend can make a difference of 1 inch or more at 100 yards, then it's easy to see how this can happen. But the main cause is that the barrel vibration cycle is altered by the damping effect of the fence post on the barrel, and the bullet leaves the bore at a different part of the vibration cycle. We'll be looking at barrel vibration in more detail later, but for now, always support the rifle by the forend, not the barrel. Cheap scopes tend to be less rugged than the more expensive ones, and they're normally used on rimfires or air guns. Also, they generally can't be repaired if a lens comes loose or the reticle breaks. Buy the best scope that you can afford. A lot of accuracy problems are caused by loose or badly fitted scope rings and bases. If you have dovetails machined into the receiver, then check that the ring base screws are reasonably tight and that the ring tops are secure. To do this properly, loosen either the front or rear ring top, tighten the ring bases if they need it, then tighten the loosened ring top and test the screws on the other one. If you have separate blocks for the scope rings, then loosen the front or rear ring top. Unscrew both of the ring bases and take the scope off. Check the block screws. I would suggest that you take the blocks off the receiver one at a time, as the front or rear can be a different size to the other. Clean the block and the receiver and refit with a thread locking compound. Now refit the scope, tightening the bases. Then the ring top that you loosened, then check the other ring top. If you don't undo one of the ring tops and you tighten the ring bases, you can build a twist into the scope which may cause problems later. Don't over-tighten the ring tops. Because of the large surface area between the rings and scope, the ring tops only need moderate tightening. If you overdo it, you'll only damage the scope. It won't be any more secure. Now check if the rifle is still zeroed. If the parallax is wrong on your scope, then by placing your eye in a slightly different position every time you mount the rifle, the point of impact can change quite dramatically. The eyepiece adjustment allows you to focus your eye on the crosshair and your target at the same time. This must be correct before you try to eliminate parallax. Point the scope at the sky or a white wall and the reticule should appear sharp and distinct. If it's not, then adjust the eyepiece to suit your eyes. With the rifle supported on sandbags or any solid rest, look through the scope at a target placed at your average hunting range. Place the crosshair on the target center by adjusting the rifle on its rest. Without moving the rifle, move your eye from side to side, and if the crosshair moves around the target, then the scope's parallax needs adjusting. The front focus or parallax adjustment is normally marked in yards or meters. Don't take any notice of these marks. Adjust the ring until the sight picture is clear and the crosshair stays on your point of aim when you move the position of your eye. Make a note of the reading on the ring or tape it to the scope body with black insulating tape. If your scope doesn't have an adjustable ring, then you can normally take off the front locking ring and adjust the inner lens holder, which gives the same effect. You may need a damp cloth to get a good grip. Once the locking ring starts to turn, look at the lens holder and make sure that it doesn't unscrew with the ring. If the lens holder is moving with the ring, Then place a piece of folded toilet paper on the lens and gently push against it while unscrewing the ring. Don't take this lens holder out, as the scope tube is filled with an inert gas which stops the scope lenses from fogging up in damp weather. Now you can focus on the target and adjust the lens holder for minimum parallax. When you've found the best position, start the locking ring on its thread, make sure that it's not cross-threaded, push against the lens with toilet paper or a tissue, and tighten the ring. If you alter the focus of the eyepiece, then you will need to readjust the front lens, as these two generally go hand in hand. If you've checked the mounts and there are no obvious signs of damage to the scope, such as a broken reticule or loose lenses, and the scope doesn't rattle when you shake it, then the only way to check if the scope is faulty is to borrow a friend's and see if your groups are still as bad. If you don't alter the windage and elevation on the borrowed scope, it will still be more or less zeroed when you return it. Mark a cross on a large piece of cardboard and try a group of, say, 5 shots using the same batch of ammunition that you used with your own scope. It's the group size that matters here, not where it is in relation to the cross. The chances are that the group will be the same as with your own scope. But if the group is significantly better, then you can safely assume that your scope is at fault. Now we come to the biggest cause of inaccuracy. Rifle hunting is expensive. You've already spent a lot of money on a rifle, a scope, a gun slip, a sling, special clothing and boots, perhaps lamps and batteries, bipods, travelling expenses, maybe dogs and a 4-wheel drive vehicle. You may have to pay for your shooting rights, especially deer stalking, so why try to save 10 or 20 pence on a round of inferior ammunition? Unless you can get consistent ammunition that suits your rifle, then you've done your money. In my experience, and that of friends and colleagues, one of the most consistent manufacturers in recent years has been Federal. If you're confident that you haven't damaged the rifle or scope, you know that you've maintained the rifle fairly well, and yet you suddenly get flyers or groups resembling a shotgun pattern, then the first thing to look at is your ammunition. If you intend to buy a quantity of ammunition, then buy 1 box and try it. If there are no flyers and your group is good, then go back and buy your quantity, but make sure they all have the same batch number as the box that you've just tried. If you only buy 1 box at a time, then zero your rifle with each new box. When we talk of bad ammunition, we usually mean inconsistent ammunition. This can be caused by variable weights of powder, unreliable primers, even varying bullet weights. If you tap a hard metal tube, you may hear a bell-like tone. This is the tube vibrating at its fundamental frequency. As a round is fired, the sudden movement in the chamber causes the barrel to try and vibrate or oscillate at its fundamental frequency. Although exaggerated, the barrel crown can move like this as the round is fired. As the bullet moves up the barrel, so the frequency becomes higher and more intense, similar to flicking a ruler on the side of a table. This is more pronounced in a thin, light barrel than with a thick, heavy one. This target would be about 50 yards away. If we could look down the bore, we would see the vibration build up until the bullet exits the bore and then slow down and stop. If each round has the same amount of powder, the same weight of bullet, the same case dimensions and consistent primers, then every bullet should exit the bore at the same point of the barrel's vibration cycle, and the group would be consistent. Any minor variations in bullet weight or powder will cause the barrel to vibrate differently, or the bullet to exit at another stage of the vibration sequence. Although the measurable movement is small, it will be magnified many thousands of times at the target. Every rifle will have a dislike of certain weights or make of ammunition. Try as many makes and weights as possible to find one that your rifle is happy with. And once you've found one that suits, go back and get as much as you can afford with the same batch number. But the only certain way of obtaining good ammunition is to reload your own. Two of the main reasons for home loading are consistency and cost. You can experiment with bullet weights and powder and produce consistent rounds that suit your rifle and can be relied upon to always strike within a known group size. The cost is around 1/3 of commercially produced ammunition, which if you have more than one caliber or you shoot a lot is a major consideration. If the initial equipment costs put you off, then look for second-hand gear. Or, if you have friends that reload, then see if they are willing to let you use theirs. Reloading is perfectly safe as long as you're sensible. Read the labels on the primer and powder cartons and always keep them in their original packaging. Nitro powder is not an explosive, but it will burn very fiercely, giving off a lot of heat and gas, and it should always be left in its original carton. Don't smoke or drink while reloading. Always wear eye protection. If you're sensible and careful, then reloading is perfectly safe. First, we'll go back to basics and look at the sequence of events when a rimless factory round is fired. This represents a cross-section of the rifle's chamber and bolt. When the round is inserted into the chamber and the bolt is closed, it's a loose fit and lies on the bottom of the chamber. Its bullet is not perfectly aligned with the bore, and the case shoulder doesn't contact the front of the chamber. When the firing pin strikes the primer, the round is pushed forward to contact the front of the chamber and the primer is detonated. The force of the primer detonation pushes it rearwards until it contacts the bolt face. The powder in the case is ignited by the primer flash, which burns and gives off heat and gas. The gas pressure builds up and forces the case to enlarge, which gives a gas-tight seal between the case and the chamber. The case also expands backwards and reseats the primer, taking up any gap between the rear of the case and the bolt face, or head space. The brass of the case also flows forward slightly, which lengthens the neck towards the throat. The still expanding gas forces the bullet from the case and into the throat, where it starts to bed itself into the rifling. The powder should still be giving off gas to propel the bullet up the bore, but it should have peaked in its burning cycle by the time the bullet is around 1/4 of the way up the barrel. As the pressure drops and the case cools, the brass contracts enough for the case to be extracted. The most important aspect of reloading is understanding the tremendous pressures involved when a round is fired. There are 3 methods used by manufacturers to measure case pressure. The crusher system, or CUP, relies on a special copper rod being compressed by the case as it is fired in a pressure barrel. The rod is accurately measured before and after firing, and the case pressure can be calculated from the difference between the 2 readings. The second method is the electronic piezo system, which measures PSI, where the pressure is measured electronically again in a purpose-made receiver. The third method is visual inspection. Looking for high pressure signs includes squash primers, burn marks around the primer, but this can also happen with an oversized primer pocket. Cratering around the firing pin indentation, though this can also occur with a weak firing pin spring or an oversized firing pin hole in the bolt face, caused by continual dry firing, or by accurately measuring the case head before and after firing. Some low-pressure signs include primers partly backed out of their pockets, burn marks along the case sides. Burn marks around the neck are normal, but not on the shoulder or sides of the case. The Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute of America, or SAMI, devised a list of maximum safe working pressures for all individual calibers. Here are the maximum safe working pressures for a few of the more popular calibers in this country. There is a series of booklets devoted to one caliber which have most of the relevant bullet and powder makers' tables in it. These are fine if you only have the one caliber. Otherwise, I would suggest one of the general purpose books, such as the Lyman Handbook, which is filled with all sorts of reloading information for all calibers. Alternatively, specific bullet and powder manufacturers' tables are available, but obviously they only show their own products. If you look up your caliber, you'll find a table of powder weights for each bullet type. The table for this bullet has the powder types on the left with the bullet velocities across the top for the different weights of each of the powders. The leftmost columns are the suggested starting loads, followed by normal loads, with maximum loads on the right. Never use less powder than the recommended starting loads, and maximum loads should be approached with caution. American reloading tables are normally compiled using the SAMI guidelines, and you may see a column relating to pressure next to some recommended loads. Overloading with all powders will obviously give high and possibly dangerous pressures. Underloading can be even more dangerous. Some underloaded powders may not ignite properly and the bullet can jam in the bore. With other powders, when a case is only partially filled through underloading, the primer flash can ignite the large surface area of the powder almost instantaneously. This can cause certain powders to ignite too quickly rather than burn at a controlled rate, resulting in a sudden and massive increase in pressure. This all sounds a bit alarming, but as long as you follow the loading tables, you'll be quite safe. Every caliber has a specific set of measurements that relate to a standard size for that caliber. These sizes and measurements are shown in most of the reloading tables. Your rifle's chamber is made slightly larger than the standard size so that the round can be inserted easily without sticking. No two rifles have exactly the same internal chamber dimensions. Normally, the differences are tiny. Sometimes they're quite large. After firing a factory round, the case has altered in shape to fit the chamber. Because of the natural springiness of brass, the case will be the exact shape of the chamber, but slightly smaller overall. This is why you can extract the case after it's been fired. Although the case exactly fits the dimensions of the rifle's chamber that it was fired in, if it's going to be reloaded and used in a different rifle, it may be too big to chamber properly, and the neck will be too large to grip the bullet. The case will have to be full-length resized to bring it back to its original dimensions. As the case is forced into the full-length resizing die, the walls, the shoulder, the neck, and the case lengths are compressed slightly smaller than their original size. As the case is withdrawn from the die, the brass expands a little, and the case is back to its original size apart from the neck. As the case is pulled further down the die, the neck expander ball contacts the inside of the neck and expands it to the right dimensions to hold a bullet. This last operation also lengthens the neck slightly. If the case is only being reloaded for use in the original rifle, then because it fits the chamber exactly, only the neck needs resizing to grip a bullet. The neck sizing die looks similar to the full-length die, but as the case is forced upwards, only the neck is compressed, then sized by the expander ball on its way down. Of the two resizing methods, neck sizing generally produces better accuracy. But if you use maximum or near maximum loads, then you may have to full-length resize occasionally when cases become harder to chamber through case expansion with these heavy loads. With large cased, small bullet rounds, such as the 22-250, and especially the 1.7, full-length resizing can quickly lead to premature neck cracks because of the force exerted on the neck and shoulder area when these high-powered cases are resized. I only neck size these cases. The case and neck will have stretched during the firing and resizing process. This shouldn't be a problem with the first or second reload. The case length should be accurately measured and compared to the recommended maximum case length from the reloading table. If the case length is the same or more, then it must be trimmed to slightly less than the recommended maximum length. There are various methods to trim cases, either by filing in a special die, cutting with an internal trimmer, or a universal trimming machine such as this. The case is gripped by a collet-type mechanism, and using the correct pilot, the case is trimmed by this cutter to a length set by these movable rings. The case will have sharp edges on the inside and outside, and these must be removed with a deburring tool. The most basic item is a press, with or without a primer arm to insert primers. You will need a set of dies and a shell holder for your caliber. Most resizer dies also decap the used primer in the same operation. You'll need a set of scales to measure the powder, a pad and lubricant to lubricate the cases, a powder funnel, a primer pocket cleaner, and a means of measuring your cases, such as vernier calipers. These items will be enough to start with, but later on you will also need a case trimmer, a case neck deburring tool, a powder measure helps if you reload a lot, and a powder trickler. All these items should last for many years, so they could be regarded as a one-off purchase. Now for the ammunition itself. First, you'll need some cases. You probably have a collection of used cases. If they're all manufactured by the same company, such as Remington, Winchester, or Norma, etc., and they were all purchased at the same time, then use these. If they're all mixed, then buy cases of the same make and batch. If you use mixed cases, then you will find that the point of impact changes from one make of case to another. The idea of reloading is to maintain consistency, so start as you mean to go on and get a good supply of the same make of case. If you look after the cases and don't go for maximum loads all the time, then the cases can be reloaded many times. Next, you'll need some bullets. Look in your book of tables and choose a normal weight soft point for your caliber. Don't go for anything exotic until you've had some experience with standard weights. Starting with the smallest caliber, the 1.7 is made by Hornady in one weight, 25 grains. For Hornets, you must get the thin-walled 40 or 45 grain bullets specifically designed for them. Normal 45 and 50 grain high-velocity bullets, as used in 222s and 22-250s, have much thicker walls. Stick to 50 grain bullets with the 222 and 55 grains with the other high-velocity .224 calibers such as 223s, 224s and 22-250s. For the 6mm or 243, I would suggest 85 to 90 grains, although 100 grains is the legal minimum for deer at the moment in England and Wales. For the 25 or 257 calibers, the average weight is around 100 grains, and the 6.5mm or 263s have a limited choice between 120 and 140 grains. The 270 averages 130 grains, with the 7mm or 284s averaging 145. The biggest choice is the 30 calibers, such as the 308 and the 30-06. I would suggest 150 grains to start with. The same goes for the 303. Now that you've chosen a bullet, look in your book of tables and choose a powder. Some tables recommend a particular combination of bullet, primer and powder as the most accurate they have found during testing. Notice that the most accurate load is not the most powerful one. If your table doesn't recommend a particular load, then go for a powder that has the larger weight or may be shown as a compressed charge near maximum loads. This is to ensure that the case is as full of powder as possible, which generally gives more consistent results than a partially filled case. Don't buy a powder unless you have a table for it, and whatever you do, don't mix different powders together, as the results will be totally unpredictable. Now look for the primer that's recommended. Primers come in 4 sizes: small and large rifle and small and large pistol. As we're only interested in rifles, here is an equivalent chart for different rifle primers. If your loading table recommends, say, Remington 9.5, then you can use Federal 210, CCI 200, etc., depending on what your local gun shop has in stock, but reduce the load slightly and work up. These are bench rest primers. They are manufactured to a very high standard to give consistently good results, and they can be used instead of normal primers. Magnum primers are mainly used in large cases filled with slow powder, but they also give more consistent ignition during very cold weather. They also cause higher pressures than the normal primer, so if you want to use Magnum primers and they aren't shown in your loading tables, then reduce the load to the minimum shown for your powder and work up. So, you've got everything you need. Now you must find a solid surface to mount the press, with room around it to work and for the other bits and pieces. To install the full-length resizer die in the press, first insert the correct shell holder into the press ram. Now raise the ram right up and screw the resizer die into the press until it touches the shell holder. Lower the ram and screw down the die a further 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn and tighten the lock nut on the die. When you press down on the arm, you should feel the press cam over at its lowest point with reasonable resistance. If a lot of effort is needed, then slacken the die slightly. Now check that the neck expander ball is about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch above the base of the die and tighten its lock nut. To install a neck sizer die, start the die in the press and put a case into the shell holder. Put the ram in its highest position and screw the die down until it touches the case mouth. Now lift the arm and screw the die in about 1/8 of an inch. Lower the arm and you'll feel the case neck being resized. Raise the arm and inspect the case. You should be able to see the resized part of the neck. Now adjust the die until the resized part is just above the case shoulder and tighten the lock nut. The expander ball now needs to be set so that the primer will be pushed out at the same time. If you are full length resizing, then apply case lubricant to your pad and rub it in with your finger. Too much lubrication will dent the case shoulder, whereas the case can jam in the die if there is none. If you gently pass a finger on the pad and you can feel a trace of lubricant, then it should be okay. Everyone adopts their own routine for reloading, and I'll demonstrate a couple with their pros and cons. And first, the quick way. Inspect the outside of your cases, and if you find any cracks or dents, then throw them away. Look inside the cases, as they could be full of mud or fluff from your pockets. Now clean the cases with a dry cloth. Roll a case on the pad so that there's a trace of lubricant on the case body, not the neck, and put the case in the shell holder and slowly press down on the lever until it reaches its maximum travel. The primer should have popped out. If not, then lower the ram and screw the decapping rod down slightly, lock it and try again. Now place a primer into the priming punch. Push the punch into the slot in the ram and raise the lever. As the ram is lowered, you'll feel the neck being resized by the neck expander bore. If this feels rough or stiff, then get some powdered graphite and apply a small amount with a paintbrush to the inside of the neck each time you resize a case. You'll feel resistance as the primer enters the pocket in the bottom of the case and seats itself. Using moderate force, make sure that the primer is seated properly. You will soon get a feeling for this, and you'll be able to tell by the resistance to the arm when the primer seats properly. If there's hardly any resistance, then the primer pocket is oversized, and you must not use this case. Throw it away. An oversized primer pocket is one of the symptoms of overloading or high case pressure. If the primer stands proud of the case, then it's not seated properly. Now wipe the case with a slightly damp cloth to remove the case lube, dry it and measure the case length. If it's more than the maximum length in your table, don't use it. Put it in a box for later use when you have a case trimmer. To reuse these cases, first pop off the primer by chambering it in your rifle and pull the trigger. Never try to punch it out on your press. The advantage of this method of case sizing is that it's quick, but there's a new primer in a dirty pocket. Your hands will have case lubrication on them, which could contaminate the primers when they are handled and cause erratic ignition. The inside of the cases might still have burnt powder in them. The inside of the die will be covered in a dirty black sludge from the mixture of case lube and burnt powder from the outside of the cases. Another method that works well with large batches is to treat each operation separately. Lower the decapping pin out of your full length or neck die until you can gently remove the spent primers without resizing the cases, and lock the pin in this position. Now decap all the cases. Clean the primer pockets to remove any carbon, and clean all the cases in a wet or dry media tumbler. If you haven't got a tumbler, then use citric acid powder from the chemist. Mix it with warm water in a washing up bowl. You may have to experiment with the amount of acid, but 2 or 3 tablespoonfuls to 2 pints of warm water is a start. Stir the cases in the acid mix every 10 minutes and leave them for about an hour or so, or until they're clean. After the cases have been tumbled or soaked, wash the cases in warm soapy water, followed by clean water, and dry them thoroughly. Resize all the cases using proper case lubrication. The case lube can be removed with a damp cloth, or better still, wash the cases gently in soapy water again and dry thoroughly. Now you've got clean, dry, resized cases They can be measured, trimmed to length, then primed. Whichever method you choose, the object is to end up with clean cases of the right length with properly seated and uncontaminated primers. Now for the powder and bullet. First of all, we have to set up the seating die. If you have a single station press, then take out the resizing die. With the seating die, undo the lock ring on the middle bullet depth rod and unscrew it. Start the die in the press and using a resized but unprimed case, put the case into the shell holder and raise the ram right up. This case will become a dummy round that can be used for resetting the bullet seating die at a later date. Screw down the seating die until you feel it touch the case mouth. Now unscrew the die about a quarter of a turn and tighten its lock nut. Lower the ram and place a bullet into the case mouth. Raise the ram and screw in the seating rod until it touches the bullet tip. Lower the ram about an inch and screw the seating rod in slightly. Raise the ram fully and you'll feel the bullet seating in the neck of the case. Now lower the ram and measure the overall length of the round. Repeat this procedure until the bullet is seated enough to give the same overall length as that shown in the reloading table. Now tighten the lock nut on the seating rod and the die is ready to use. This procedure applies to both full length and neck size only resized cases. Now for the powder charge. Place your scales on a firm surface away from any plastic boxes, as these can sometimes carry a small electromagnetic charge that can influence the readings. Zero the scale by moving the counterweights to zero. Make sure that the powder bowl is clean and adjust the pedestal screw to obtain a level reading. Move the counterweights to your intended powder weight. On this scale, the large weight moves in 5 grain increments and the small weight gives 1/10 of a grain. Your scale may be marked differently, but the principle is the same. For this 168 grain bullet, I need a starting load of 31 grains of Reloader 7. Check the scales again just to be sure. Now spoon the powder into the pan until the scale balances. Too much and the pointer goes above the level mark and we have to take some out. Too little and we have to add powder. This is a bit fiddly, but you'll soon be able to judge how much to add. To make life easier, some die sets come with a measuring ladle. These can also be purchased separately and they give a fairly consistent volume of powder each time. Better still are the powder measures, where a container is filled and a consistent volume of powder is dispensed by moving a handle. These methods only dispense volumes of powder, not weights. These dispensers are quite accurate when using 40 or 50 grain loads in large calibers, where part of a grain either way won't make too much difference. But in lighter rounds, using perhaps 10 or 20 grains, half a grain will be more than noticeable. By using a measure that is set to throw slightly less than you need, or a ladle that does the same, the weight can be gradually increased with a powder trickler until the scale reads exactly level. Using a small funnel, tap the powder into the case. Put the loaded case into the shell holder, place a bullet into the case mouth and raise the ram to its full extent. Load another 4 rounds and this first batch can be tried at a target. We'll assume that your rifle was zeroed at 100 yards with factory ammunition, so we'll try these first rounds at the same distance. Place your target or mark a cross with insulating tape towards the top of a large piece of card. An old cardboard box will do. These initial loads may drop below the target, and the idea of the card is to see the first group, whether or not it hits the target. For continuity during these tests, thoroughly clean the barrel and chamber. Pull or push through a patch soaked in mess a couple of times. Now a couple of dry patches. This is to ensure that the first couple of rounds aren't flyers due to oil or cleaning fluid in the barrel. And for the sake of continuity, use exactly the same cleaning method before you try each batch of reloads. Use a firm support for the rifle. Take your time and let the rifle cool for say 5 to 10 minutes between each round. The recoil should have been milder than with factory rounds, and you should have a good group below and perhaps to one side of the target. Measure the group across its widest point and write it down as Group 1. Check your used cases for any signs of problems, such as burns around primers, splits in the case, and compressed primers. If everything is all right, then you can load some more rounds with slightly more powder. Refer to your reloading table, and if, as in this case, the difference between the starting load and maximum is around 5 grains, then increase the load by 1 grain. If the difference for your caliber is say 3 grains, then go up by half a grain. Either way, load another 5 or 6 rounds and try them at the target. Remember to clean the barrel and chamber exactly the same way as before, and take the same amount of time between each round. This next group will probably strike slightly higher than the last. It may have moved across one way or the other, or it could even be lower. This is normally caused by the barrel vibrating differently, or the bullet exiting at another point in the vibration cycle. Measure and note the group size as before and cover the holes. Check the cases again, then compare the group size with the previous one. If the group is about the same size, then carry on increasing the load and measuring until you reach the powder weights midway across the table. If your groups are starting to get much bigger, then reduce the powder by half or 3/10 of a grain and try again. You're looking for the point where the groups start to increase in size. Then you can go back down in small powder weights until they are the minimum possible. This will then be the optimum load for your powder, primer and bullet in your rifle. Most rifles will shoot tight groups from the starting load. They then begin spreading the groups at a certain point, and by using more and more powder, the groups get larger and larger. Occasionally the groups can start large, then reduce with more powder, until they start to expand again as the charge gets even higher. You're looking for the smallest group size, at which point you can reload a number of rounds and zero the rifle to match them. If your groups are large all through the powder weight range from starting to near maximum, and you're confident that your rifle is sound, then you'll probably have to try a different combination of powder and primer and start again. If you change the primer, powder or bullet, or even get the same powder and primers but they have a different batch number, then go back to the starting load and work up again. Never take chances, and always inspect the cases after use. Once you're happy with a load, then you can produce a quantity of rounds and zero your rifle with that load. Make a note of the bullet make and weight, the make of the primer, and the powder type and weight, so that you can reproduce this load in future. Later on, you can experiment with different bullet types and weights, but again, reduce the powder charge and work up. If you get cracks or splits around the neck of your cases after a few reloads, then it may be that the brass has become brittle. You'll have to discard the cracked cases, but the rest can be annealed by immersing them in water to just below their shoulder. Using a blow lamp, heat the necks until they're a dull red or cherry red, and immediately knock them over into the water. They can then be reused as normal. If the powder tends to stick to your funnel through static, wash the funnel in water with a small amount of washing up liquid. Leave it to dry naturally, don't rub it with a cloth. That about brings us to the end of this video, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. Our next effort will be available soon, and this will concentrate on rifle shooting in the field. We'll be showing most aspects of vermin control from crows to foxes, as well as stalking for the pot, from rabbits to deer, also carcass preparation. But for now, goodbye and good shooting. In the first two videos, we covered most of the basics, such as scope mounting and reloading. Now, we're going to look at some of the areas that we need to consider when using your rifle in the field, and we'll start with clothing. You will need the appropriate colour and type of clothes for the time of year. Now we have to be aware of large blocks of the same tone. For instance, a wet wax jacket will look almost black, and every movement against a light background could easily be seen. The best compromise for most backdrops is the disruptive pattern material, or camo, as used by the Army. The colour of your clothing is not as important as its brightness, because most of the animals that we hunt have very good low light or night vision, which means they see little, if any, colour. For instance, to camouflage yourself from human eyes, these colours and patterns break up our outline and represent a good compromise against various backdrops. The same picture, as seen by a deer, gives a similar camouflage effect as that seen by ourselves. But in our eyes, this colour combination stands out like a sore thumb, even though the pattern is the same. In a monochrome world, different colours appear as various shades of grey. What appears as bright orange to us looks like mid-grey to an animal. It's difficult to judge the relative brightness of colours, so by using colours similar to our background, we can blend in more easily. Notice that this mono image is virtually the same as the previous one. Now, starting at the top, a cap or hat will help to disguise your forehead and is essential in the winter, as most of your body heat can escape through your head. Or you could use a hood that matches your jacket. To cover your face, these ex-army tubes can be worn as a neck warmer and pulled up to cover your face when needed. A scarf made from ex-army scrim can also be used for the same purpose. Cheap cotton polo neck jumpers make an ideal underlayer. They keep your neck warm and soak up any rain before it runs down your neck. A good buy is the thin ex-army cotton camo jackets. Get one that's bigger than you need, and it can be worn over a t-shirt in the summer or over a waterproof jacket in the bad weather. Wax jackets are okay, if you're in a high seat or a hide for hours on end. But if you're stalking, they get really sweaty and make a hell of a noise in brambles or forestry. The best coat for hunting that I've found is the camo from Truman Nielsen. This is totally waterproof, silent, and it's much lighter than a wax coat. It's got some nice touches, such as the stud on the shoulder to stop your rifle sling from sliding off, and a flap so you can sit on wet ground. With a detachable hood, it makes the perfect hunting coat. You should disguise your hands, and lightweight, fingerless gloves work very well and only cost £1 or £2. If the weather is dry, then ankle boots are fine, but I prefer a good pair of well-fitting wellies, as there's nothing worse than stepping in a bog early on and spending the rest of the day with squelching boots. Lastly, trousers. You'll probably get covered in all sorts of rubbish fairly soon when stalking, so cheap army surplus will be fine. I prefer breeks to wear with wellies, as they're more comfortable, and these heavy corduroys get warmer as they get wetter. Basically, try to keep dry and warm, and wear the right tones. We looked at bipods, lens caps, and other bits and pieces in the first 2 videos, so I won't cover those again. But one essential item, especially when stalking, is a good knife. You can pay anything from £3 to £80, but what you need is a good steel blade that holds an edge. This cheap work knife has a carbon steel blade that holds an edge well, but it doesn't lock open, so it could close on your fingers. The French Opinel is cheap, but it's got a good blade that holds an edge and it locks open. This knife looks okay and costs between £4 to £8. It locks open, but the blade doesn't hold an edge, and it really is a waste of money. Now, I've used this buck knife for years, and although it costs around £50, it really holds an edge well. It locks open, and the sculptured handle gives you something to grip on when your hands are cold or covered in blood. There are specialist knives, such as this Wyoming, which uses a disposable blade. I've used this for a few years, and it's quite good, but at 40 odd pounds it's a bit of a luxury. There are lots of ways to sharpen a knife, and you can buy all sorts of stones and kits, but I prefer the steel sharpener sold for kitchen knives called the Kitchen Devil. You press the knife at right angles into the steel cross and carefully pull down. Do this a few times, then turn the knife over and draw from the inside of the cross to finish off. You can keep this in a pocket and put a fresh edge on your blade when it needs it. So, choose your knife carefully and make sure it's comfortable to use. Most of my lamping for foxes is done alone, and the system I've used for the past few years consists of a Clusen laser lamp powered by a 12-volt battery belt and a Brinkmann Q-beam 1 million candle power spotting lamp that plugs into the car. Both lamps are fitted with a 1/4-inch audio jack plug, and sockets are mounted in my rust bucket and on the battery belt. Places such as Tandy sell the plugs and sockets, and all the connections are soldered for reliability. I use a 1/7 for foxes with the laser lamp mounted on the scope. The belt and carriers are ex-Army webbing with a 6-volt 8-amp-hour battery on either side. The batteries are connected in series via a cable round the back with an inline car fuse and a jack socket on the left-hand side. The belt is easy to wear when getting in and out of a vehicle, and the lamp can be plugged in very quickly. Before going out, I first point the lamp at a fence or post or anything at about 100 yards and check that the scope reticule is in the middle of the beam. If not, the lamp is adjusted to suit. The hill estate where I work takes 4 or 5 hours to cover by vehicle, so the rifle goes in the rack, and I use the Brinkmann for spotting. Once a fox is seen, I switch all the lights off and stop the vehicle. It only takes a few seconds to grab the rifle, plug in the lamp, open the bipods, and shoot from the wing or the bonnet. I'd better just mention here that I only do this on the private roads within the estate. If you're on foot, this particular lamp has a 2-position switch, which selects the main beam or a low-power walking lamp. I always carry a small torch in my pocket in case a fuse or a bulb blows. And in the vehicle, I carry spare bulbs and fuses in a tin. Most modern lamps use a quartz halogen bulb of 50 to 100 watts. They're normally the same as the ones used in projectors, and they cost around £3 to £4 each. Don't touch the glass when changing them. Use a tissue or the bulb's packaging. If you do touch the bulb, then clean it with meths and dry it thoroughly. I'm not too keen on the sealed beam type of lamps. A friend got through 3 in a season, and they cost him £25 each. The Clusen has a narrow pencil beam and is supposed to give 1 million candle power with a 50-watt bulb. The Brinkmann has a wide beam and gives 1 million candle power with a 100-watt bulb. The power consumption of a lamp is equal to its wattage divided by the battery's voltage. So a 50-watt lamp draws 4.2 amps at 12 volts, and a 100-watt draws 8.3 amps at the same voltage. Most lamping kits use dry or sealed lead-acid batteries, which are normally marked with their voltage and ampere-hour rating. This battery is 12 volts and 17 ampere-hours, so the 50-watt lamp drawing 4.2 amps will last for 17 divided by 4.2, or just over 4 hours for continuous use. The 100-watt lamp, drawing 8.5 amps, will last for 17 divided by 8.5, or 2 hours. Most problems with this type of battery occur because they're left in a discharged state for long periods, they are discharged completely, or they're incorrectly charged. As soon as you notice the lamp starting to dim, switch it off and recharge the battery. Never drain the battery completely, and never leave it discharged for long periods. Your charger needs to be a constant voltage type, giving 13.8 volts. A car battery charger will ruin one of these batteries very quickly, as they are made for wet-type lead-acid batteries and they give a higher voltage. It's worth measuring the voltage at the battery terminals, as the battery is being charged, and it should climb to 13.8 volts, no more. These batteries are still going strong after 5 years, and they're used at least twice a week. You can fit a red filter to most lamps, and I think it's a matter of personal choice whether or not they make a difference to a lamp-shy fox. But I use 2 red fog lamps on the front of my Land Rover. With all the other lights off, these give enough light to drive around the estate at night without startling everything in the area. I've tried a few of the cheaper night vision scopes, and I've been a bit disappointed. If you fancy one, then I'd suggest that you try it before parting with any cash. If you're going to be out for more than a couple of hours, then eat well before you leave and take a snack and a drink with you. When stalking isolated areas, take a compass with you. If the area is new, then get a map and get a rough fix of the area and your starting point in your mind. If the weather closes in, you will have a good chance of getting back to your vehicle relatively quickly. Now we'll look at various hunting calibers, and for small quarry out to 50 or 60 yards, the 2.2 rimfire can't be beaten. I prefer a 40 grain subsonic round as it tends to be more accurate than the lighter high velocity ammunition, and it's less affected by wind. With a rimfire, you can also fit a sound moderator. The speed of sound is around 1120 feet per second, so if a bullet leaves the rifle barrel at more than this speed, it emits a sonic crack the same as a jet makes a boom as it breaks the sound barrier. The bang from subsonic ammunition is the sound of the propellant exploding, and a good sound moderator can absorb most of this noise. But it won't quieten any crack from hypersonic rounds. Now, moving out to 100 or 120 yards, I would recommend a Hornet or a 2.2 Magnum rimfire. Both of these rounds will drop a fox at this range, with the Hornet extending it to around 150 yards. If you reload for the Hornet, then you have to buy the thin-walled 224 bullets specifically designed for it, as the normal 224 bullets for 222s and 22 250s won't expand at the Hornet's lower velocity. For long ranges, say out to 200 yards, the 222 and 223 take some beating. These are excellent rounds for vermin and are capable of taking small deer at close range if it's legal in your area. At 300 plus yards, the 22 250 and the 5.6 by 57 are the heavyweights of the small calibers. Long-range vermin control and neck shooting of most deer could be covered with these two rounds. Until recently, these were the biggest rounds allowed in Southern Ireland, and all deer control was carried out with them. Now the bigger calibers. With the 243 through to the 308, range is more or less irrelevant, as they are all capable of more than 200-yard accuracy. All of them will dispatch any deer with a neck shot, but for heart and lung shots on big reds or hybrids, I favour the 6.5 or the 308. There are obviously a lot more calibers than those mentioned, but they will all fall into the main groups we have looked at. Ideally, the bullet should start expanding as it passes through flesh and bone, and dissipate most of its energy, destroying the vital organs. With all calibers, there is a choice of bullet type and weights. I favour the round-nose, lead-tip bullets towards the heavier end of a caliber's range. The light, explosive tip types were designed for long-range shooting, where they should reliably expand at extreme ranges. The problem here is that striking an unseen blade of grass, say 40 yards from the rifle, can make the round disintegrate. Also, striking an animal at close range can make the bullet explode as soon as it touches flesh, causing a tremendous flesh wound with the animal running off. What we are trying to achieve is a quick, humane kill by destroying vital organs within the animal. With small animals, such as rabbits, we only have to consider a general area, normally the chest cavity. This is partly because of the high power-to-weight ratio, or knockdown power, of the calibers we use. For instance, Using a subsonic 2.2 rimfire with a 40-grain bullet, the terminal energy of the round at 50 yards is about 90 foot-pounds. If we say the rabbit weighs 2 pounds, then by dividing the energy by the rabbit's weight, we get a ratio of 45:1. If you can group your shots at less than 2 inches, then this area will give consistent and humane kills. The same applies to foxes. Using a light centerfire round, say a 222, at 100 yards the terminal energy is about 800 foot-pounds. If the fox weighs 20 pounds, then this gives a ratio of 40:1. With a 22-250, we get an energy of 1200 foot-pounds, which gives a massive 60:1 ratio. For a fox, we need a consistent group size of about 3 inches. With larger animals, such as a medium-sized deer of 120 pounds, the ratio is much lower. A 243 over 100 yards with a terminal energy of around 1600 foot-pounds will give a ratio of 13:1. Even the most powerful 270 round over this distance, delivering 2300 foot-pounds, will only push the ratio up to 19:1. So, we have to be a lot more precise with larger quarry. This involves exact bullet placement on a vital organ, such as the heart and lungs, or the bones in the animal's neck. For heart and lung shots, a group size of 4 or 5 inches will be needed. But for neck shots, the ability to group at 1 inch is essential. You must be sure of your grouping ability at various ranges, so practice with a target as often as you can. You can also pick up any changes in your point of impact due to a new batch of ammo or other problems, and correct them before you go into the field. It takes practice to decide where, for instance, the heart is in relation to an animal's angle. A sideways presentation is fairly simple. Aim just above the foreleg joint, and as long as the background is safe, this is an easy shot. When an animal is facing you, although a heart shot is possible, the bullet could also burst the stomach and the round could exit on the back rump, ruining the meat. With larger calibers, the bullet will normally exit at a slightly different angle to its entry, covering a small area behind the animal. Sometimes the bullet can strike the edge of a rib on entry, and again as it exits, with quite a deflection behind the animal. So bear this in mind and ensure that you've got a safe backdrop. It's impossible for us to imagine living in a world with a sense of smell hundreds of times better than our own. With a reasonable breeze, a deer can smell a human at over a mile away. So the wind, which carries our scent to the animal, is the first thing to consider, as any animal downwind of you will have disappeared before you see it. On open ground, it's easy to keep the wind in your face, but in hilly forestry blocks it can swirl and come from any direction. For instance, if the wind is coming from the right and you're stalking a beast that's grazing towards the bottom of a small hill, the wind will come over the hill and the low pressure area on the lee side will cause it to curl back round. Looking from above, if you close in, the wind will carry your scent to the beast. If you move off to the left or right, well away from the hill, you can approach at an angle with less chance of the animal picking up your scent. Another problem in heavy forestry blocks is that the rides or fire breaks can carry the wind in different directions to the prevailing wind, and also act as funnels, creating more of a draft in the ride than the open wind speed. Where possible, stay in the forestry, and if you step out into a ride, do it slowly, testing the wind as you go. An animal's hearing is more acute than ours. Their ears act as reflectors to concentrate the sound. They can be swiveled to focus both ears towards a sound or spread apart for all-round listening. Obviously, you'll need to be quiet when stalking. Move slowly, taking care where you place your feet so as not to break twigs underfoot. In forestry, branches scraping on a wax jacket make a lot more noise than a softer material. Grazing animals such as deer have poor direct vision, and they have a panoramic view of their surroundings. What they look for is sudden movement, such as a white face or hand suddenly moving against a dark background, or an unusual object on the skyline. You need to break up your outline and cover any light areas such as face and hands. Move when the beast is grazing and keep still when its head's up. Regular observation of your patch will give you an idea of what and when something normally appears. To ambush corvids, stock casualties, such as sheep, usually attract crows and magpies. Or you could use decoys such as these. You can also try making a rough nest out of some dried grass. Put a piece of cling film in the bottom and crack an egg onto the cling film. Leave the broken pieces next to the egg and put a whole one in as well. With birds such as magpies and crows, you will need cover above and around yourself, such as a plantation or a building. To bring the birds in quicker, try calling them. This crow call works fairly well. Listen to the noise the locals are making and try to imitate it. Here they tend to keep in touch with 3 short calls. You can make up a call for magpies by putting a few shot in an old film canister. Shake it as fast as you can. This with the broken eggs works very well. For ground species, a wall, trees or other cover downwind of your shooting area will allow you to arrive before your quarry and wait. When rabbits are kept below ground because of heavy rain during the day, if it eases off in the evening and there's a slight breeze, you can be sure they'll come out to graze as it gets dark. If they scatter after the first shot, just be patient, as they will normally be out again within 10 minutes or so. Whether during the day, or especially at night, squeaking for foxes works well. A realistic rabbit or hare squeak can be made with a couple of dry lolly sticks, 2 elastic bands, a matchstick and a strip of plastic. The plastic from a non-stretch plastic bag will do, the stretchy types don't work. Alternatively, the leader tape from an old cassette works very well. Cut a strip of the plastic longer than the sticks and slightly narrower, or use a piece of the cassette leader. Now place it along the centre of one of the sticks and put the other stick on top. Secure one end tightly with an elastic band. Now, split a matchstick lengthways so that you end up with 2 equal parts. This may take more than one try, and may also need a touch of sanding to get the pieces fairly square. Now prise open the other end of the sticks and insert a piece of matchstick either side of the plastic. Put slight tension on the plastic and grip the lolly sticks in the middle to hold them in place. Wrap the second elastic band around one side of the matchstick. Pass it across the lolly sticks, then wrap the other side of the matchstick. Go back and forth until the band is used up. Put the squeaker between your teeth, gripping it gently, and blow. You can adjust the basic sound by pulling the matchstick and tensioning the plastic. In use, you can change the pitch by squeezing the sticks between your teeth. Squeak for a few seconds, tailing off the volume. Now keep quiet for 2 or 3 minutes and try again. I've found this call works really well, and if lost or broken, it only takes 5 minutes to make another. This is a commercial fox call that works quite well and imitates a fox yelp. It will bring a fox in during the mating season, but only give 1 or 2 short blasts or you'll scare them off. This also works well at stopping a Lampshire fox. As it runs away, get it in your sights and give 1 sharp blast. This is normally enough to stop the fox for a few seconds. This is my 2.2 rimfire. It's a synthetically stocked Ruger 7722, fitted with an old Zieler 3-9x40 scope, and I use Ely subsonic ammunition. Out of the box, the bolt was very stiff when trying to close on a round. I stripped the bolt and applied valve grinding compound just here. The bolt was reassembled and worked in the action. I repeated this until the bolt closed smoothly, but with some pressure on a round. The trigger was really stiff, so that was taken apart and gently honed. It's better, but these rifles tend to have heavy triggers. Replacement triggers are available, but they're around 40 or 50 pounds. Next, the point of impact changed after 3 or 4 rounds at a target. This was due to too much 4M pressure, and as the barrel heated up, the point of impact changed. An easy fix, this one. I cut a piece of hard plastic and placed it under what could be called the recoil block. This gives me a more or less floating barrel, but it cured the problem. Lastly, I wanted to be able to fit a bipod. As these rifles have sling mounts built in, I drilled the stock and used a piece of dense plastic to take a quick detach mount. Each of my rifles has a strap fixed at the butt end and a quick detach mount at the fore end, so I can use one bipod on all 3 rifles. Straps are a lot cheaper than bipods. This rifle now gives me a consistent 1-inch group at 50 yards, and the scope is set at around 7 times magnification, which gives me a point of impact for 100 yards when lined up with the bottom duplex point. To do this, you obviously need a variable power scope, and just 0 at say 50 yards. Now, move the target to 100 yards and aiming directly at the bull, fire 3 or 4 shots. The group will be larger and well below the bull, but mark the group centre with a felt tip pen. Now clamp the rifle with the crosshairs aligned on the bull at 100 yards. Adjust the scope magnification until the bottom point of the duplex is in line with the pen mark. Now you can take a 50-yard shot using the crosshairs. 75 yards is halfway between the crosshair and the bottom duplex mark, and 100 yards is on the bottom duplex mark. This is my Fox rifle. It's a specially stocked Seiko M17 Remington with a fully floating barrel and bedded action. It's fitted with a Leupold fixed 12 by 44mm scope, and given reasonable wind conditions, crows and foxes don't stand a chance even at 350 yards. With a muzzle velocity of more than 4,000 feet per second, it's a devastating round and normally explodes on impact. Although when I fired at this heavy gape from 60 yards, it made a clean entry hole and a clean exit hole. Very strange. My deer rifle is a heavy-barreled Ruger 77 in .308, again with a floating barrel and bedded action. It's fitted with a Schmidt & Bender 3-12 by 50 scope. Now I'm usually pretty cynical about scopes, but the clarity, colour balance and build quality of this scope is outstanding, and I cannot praise it highly enough. I use 150 to 165 grain bullets, and this rifle groups around an inch at 100 yards. Apart from a normal shotgun for grouse days, this animal, an 8-shot open-sighted pump action, is used with 1 1/4 ounce slugs for the humane destruction of injured stock. And with 3-inch Magnum No. 3s, it's very effective for close-range vermin control. It's easy to forget a rifle's bullet drop when changing from one caliber to another. Print it on a small label and stick it inside the scope cover. Lastly, you have a choice of synthetic or wooden stocks. Synthetic is easy to clean and waterproof, but a traditional stock does look better. I hope you've enjoyed these videos and that they've been helpful in one way or another. So keep checking your zero, keep it clean, and above all, keep it safe.